In 2010, the Small Business Administration started an initiative called Small Business Saturday. So, how effective has Small Business Saturday been, and should you always shop local and shop small? Let's get into it. All right, so welcome back. We are on number 19 of Theory of Why. My name is Rob Johnson. Just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor of the show, Key Bank. More on them later in the show. So I want to talk a little bit about Small Business Saturday and what prompted this. I initially wasn't planning on talking about this during this first initial batch of shows, but what prompted this was a conversation I had with a friend of mine recently, and we were talking about small business initiatives in little towns, little communities. And it got me thinking about, kind of the history of Small Business Saturday and when that went back to, and all of these shop local, shop small initiatives. And I thought it might be helpful to provide more of a context, because I probably have a little bit of a different view than most when it comes to supporting small businesses. And let's start with the track record, the history of Small Business Saturday. And when you look at the numbers from 2010 to 2022, Small Business Saturday has been wildly effective. It's a day that follows Black Friday, and it's the SBA's way of counterpunching a lot of the digital holidays that go on. So Black Friday has largely evolved from a day of going out into the community to a day of online deals. Both still exist, obviously. And then you also have Cyber Monday. And Small Business Saturday falls in between these 2 days. It's an initiative that encourages shoppers to go out, shop local, discover shops and boutiques in their community. And overall, I think it's a really good initiative. I think it makes a lot of sense. It brings a lot of awareness to downtown districts. And I think largely it's really helpful. Where I think people go awry is when we start talking about the importance of shop local, shop small. And on the whole, I agree with that thought. I think that is important. However, what prompted this was I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he was saying these initiatives that they're starting here in Brighton and in Livingston County. And he asked my opinion on them. And I said, well, I think you should always shop small and shop local if the business is good. I don't think you should blindly support business or just support business because they're small. And a lot of times people conflate these two ideas of, you have to shop small, or this particular business went out of business and it's because of retail giants, or it's because of, all of these external factors. And in actuality, it's probably because they weren't very good at running the business. Now, there are those, fringe companies where economic factors do decimate them, but if you can't adapt and grow with the market, you aren't going to survive. And if your only leaning is, I'm a small business, you need to support small, and that's your only differentiator between you and corporate retailers, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think small businesses don't do a great job of discovering those differentiators. They just have an idea for a product, they put it out there, and then they encourage people to shop, and they lean on the fact that they're a small business. They're not Walmart, they're not Meijer, they're not, Kohl's. And while, yes, that is a differentiator, it's not one that has long-standing power for small businesses. And that's where developing an X factor can really be helpful. And a really good X factor that is overlooked, and I would say a healthy majority of the businesses I've visited, is service, customer service. It's just completely lacking. When I walk into Walmart or Kohl's or whatever, I don't expect any particularly great level of service. It's very transactional, right? On the small business side, your job is to be relational. You're building relationships. You're building service profile. So that way, even if you are charging more for a similar product than a big box store, people can justify that purchase by saying, I know it's going to be great service. I know there's going to be a warranty, or I know they're going to stand behind this product, whereas a big box retailer may not. That's a differentiator. But if your only claim to fame is that you're small, therefore people ought to support you, it's not going to be enough to sustain you in the marketplace. And this message is not directed towards the people that have that mindset already, because odds are they're not going to listen. This message is directed towards people that are considering starting a small business. They're thinking about ways to enter into a marketplace that might be crowded, or there might be retail giants that are pressing in. That's what this message is about, because small businesses are the majority of the economy in the United States, but that number is getting smaller and smaller every year. So until we can change the way that we operate small businesses and the way that we promote small businesses, that number is going to keep diminishing. And that majority is pretty close to 50-50 right now. And we're at risk for swinging under 50% for the first time ever. And I don't believe that the Small Business Administration or the state government, especially here in Michigan, have done a particularly great job of investing in small businesses, because they say a lot of things that they don't back up with their policies. You can look at any number of landmines that the state government threw towards small businesses during COVID. And meanwhile, they were saying how much they value and support small businesses. And that just wasn't shown through the policies that were being put out. And a lot of small businesses suffered, and having, 2 rounds of PPP and an ERC program that most small businesses didn't qualify for isn't enough to sustain those, 1 to 2 man companies. And it wasn't. And that's why we're seeing, even right now, several businesses closing down still 3 years later from the economic fallout. And there's a ton of different economic factors that go into why we're in the position that we're in right now. And in some instances, it's more of a national problem with our economy, with what we have when it comes to inflation. And in other doses, it's the wrong education being put out towards small businesses in small communities. And that's one thing that I am really hoping to change, at least here in Livingston County, where I'm based in, is how businesses, especially ones that are in the startup phase, approach scaling and approach their business as a whole strategy. And one thing that I've done and we've put into place here in the last few months is this entrepreneur forum. So with this entrepreneur forum, we want small businesses to put themselves in a position to have access to experts that are in the 5 most important categories for a business as they scale. And that's accounting, finance, organizational development, legal, and marketing. So if you have a trusted expert, someone that you can go to in those 5 areas, and they can give you really clean, clear advice, that's a benefit. And that's missing in a lot of areas. You have institutions like chambers of commerce, but the problem with the chambers of commerce when it comes to linear advice is that they might have a ton of lawyers on their roster. They might have a ton of accountants on their roster. Whereas with this entrepreneur forum, it's a much smaller number because it's much more vetted in terms of who would we recommend to help a small business scale. And moreover, we have these quarterly events, the first one starting in August, where people can come, interact, engage, and there's, a keynote speaker, they go through a topic, but it is very much a forum where it's very Q&A driven. It's very crowd participation, crowd interaction. When I was sketching out the plans for this forum, I didn't want it to be something where people just went to a lecture for an hour and heard someone talk and then leave. Like, to me, there's not a lot of value there. There's zero dialogue. And I just don't find that to be the best way people learn, especially when you're in the startup phase, because you have a ton of questions, you have a ton of problems, and every day you uncover a new problem that you didn't have before. So this entrepreneur forum is a way, at least here in Livingston County, that we can start changing that narrative and giving small businesses really good tactical and practical advice as they grow and scale. One area I've been concerned about is the restaurant industry. We've seen several restaurants close down here in Livingston County over the last year. And I think a big part of that is when we transitioned through COVID, the economy for how a restaurant survives changed pretty dramatically. Before COVID, there was a market for for restaurants to go and attract talent and pay talent the way they've always paid them for the last 50 years. After COVID, people started really thinking about their value, their worth, and we've seen that specifically in the restaurant industry where people are demanding more money. They're asking for more money or at least better treatment. And restaurant industries as a whole has a pretty bad reputation when it comes to employee retention and how they treat their employees. So now people are asking for more. And the restaurants that aren't willing to change and pivot to that service model where they're treating their employees the same way they treat the guests that walk through the door are finding it very difficult to find talent. And when they do find talent, they're finding it difficult to retain that talent because there's restaurant openings all over the place. It's not that there's only one game in town for an experienced server or bartender to go to. And that's something that has changed through COVID. And I think that's changed for the better because I've always been a mindset of companies ought to be employee first because those employees are going to control the longevity of the company. And if they're not prioritized, then they're not going to prioritize the guests, the clients, the customers, whoever that might be for your business. If the people on your front lines aren't well taken care of, they're not going to take great care of the people who are in front of them because they have so many conflicting stressors and things going on in the background. It's difficult to put 100% into the job. And I've wanted very much to talk to restaurants about this, and I haven't had any takers for the restaurant forum because it's a difficult message to hear, I think.
Rob, to butt in for a little bit on that serving thing, I would agree, after COVID, there is a shortage of people, right, to be able to do that, but it sure seems like to me the customer service is lacking, and it could be, I didn't think about that, the idea that, hey, if you don't like me here, I can go there, here, or there to get a job, right? I'm not dependent on this job as a server. I can go next door and get the same job again. Whereas before it was competitive, more competitive to be able to find a job.
Yeah.
So they would be trying to give you better customer service. Now I don't feel it's as easy as that.
No, I don't either. And there's places that I've gone to for years that I've seen the decline, and it's more anecdotal because it's just a few places I've been to. But even when you look at the data in the marketplace, it suggests the same thing, that restaurants are having a difficult time with retention. And it could be several factors, but to me, it just seems that if you don't have that culture that people want to be a part of, they're just going to go find somewhere else to work that is better for them. Because I think, if anything, I know at least for me, like COVID did a really good job of getting people to slow down and weigh what's most important. And I know that's not universal across the board that everyone did that, but I know several people that are in my circles that did that. And they really thought about, do I want to just work at home more? Do I want to work less? Do I want to invest in myself and start something on my own so I'm not dependent on, this employer? And I think it caused a lot of thought for people as far as like what their career ambitions are. And if an organization isn't willing to invest in their people, then that organization isn't going to be long-standing. And the excuse of, well, we're just small, we're just starting off, we can't do all of that, like that's not a valid excuse. There's nowhere in the startup phase that permits mistreatment of people that are helping you build what you have in your company. And there's nothing that's permissible about that. There's no excuse that you can levy at someone to say, well, now I'm in a startup phase, so it's okay to mistreat people in the beginning because I'll make it up to them on the back end. That's not going to work. And I've seen people lean on that excuse time and time again that, it's crazy. We're just getting started. I'm going to pay you $8 an hour and then I promise I'll make it up to you later. It's like, that's not a successful business model, because once that train takes off and leaves the station, it's very hard to bring it back in and say, okay, well, now we're going to change this entire business model that will now account for paying people more. So I've always been a major proponent of whatever you think is reasonable to pay a position starting off. That's what you need to build your business model around, because it's not going to magically change directions and put you in a position to pay people more all of a sudden. Very few businesses have the opportunity to do that.
And the whole idea is that's money you're never going to get back. As that employee that's never going to get there, if they start off at $8, they were worth $10 to be able to do that.
Yeah.
They're never making that up, right? That's even though they can say, yeah, they're going to get a raise later on that's going to pay them 10, they still lost $2 an hour for every one of those hours they worked before that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could call it an opportunity cost. You could call it a lot of things from the business owner's point of view, but I would just call it, poor planning on their part of not building the company for long-term success. And this isn't like something that I'm on the outside of. Like, I consult with small businesses, work with small businesses all the time. I see the inner workings of their companies and how they work and how they think. And the companies that have long-term success, that have scaled and grown even through a poor economy, are the ones that invest in their people. And if you're not willing to do that, then you ought not to be an employer. You should be a contractor. If you're not willing to step up and invest in the people, then you have no business being in the business game. So this relates very much to small businesses, because small businesses are the origin of corporations. They're the origin of big business. And how a business is scaled reflects what it's like when it gets big. And it's not to say, like, if a business starts small and grows large and they started with a really good core, that they're always going to be great. I mean, we talked about Wells Fargo on a previous episode and how they went off the rails. And a lot of times when you have ownership change or CEO change or a leadership change, the company can go off the rails. And you have good and bad examples of that. You have companies like Wells Fargo that went in a completely different direction. Then you have companies like Apple and Microsoft that have lived through several leaders and visionaries and have continued to stay, how they were as their small core. And it's just an idea for people that are getting started in the entrepreneurial game to really consider how they want to be seen from their employees' point of view. And is it something that they're happy with? Are they proud of how they treat people? Are they happy with what they've done? And not just from the ownership perspective, but from the employee perspective. Would you be happy to go to work at that place? And that's something I think about all the time as we get bigger. Am I still making all of the right moves? And one thing that's been really helpful, and I've done this since I've had 2 employees, is I send out anonymous surveys every month. And it goes through our payroll system. The employees fill it out. I have no way of telling who said or ranked what. And that's been some of the most helpful advice, is getting feedback from people and them saying, hey, I'd really like you to consider this benefit, or I really loved when you did this, or, can we do more gatherings outside of the office? Or just those are those super valuable feedback tips that I get that I really want to know, because I am in ownership land. I am not in employee land. So as much as I can get an inside perspective from employees, the better the company is going to be. And I've done that, like I said, since I've had 2 employees. I've always had those surveys. And it was something that I built into the beginning of the business because it was something I wanted to be there as we scaled. And that's something I would highly advise small businesses to do. So I know the episode started off talking about the SBA and Small Business Saturday and, shop local and shop small and all of that. And it kind of evolved into this path of, talking about mistakes that small businesses make. But I think all of those errors that we've talked about today contribute to people not wanting to do business with your company. They don't want to shop small for you because of the service dynamic, because of the people, or because of the offering. And sometimes it's because of the entitlement. I see we have these pages here in Livingston County. It's Brighton happenings and Howell happenings. And I see business owners all the time, like, frustrated and talking about like how no one wants to patronize their business, or people need to have a better mindset of shopping small. And it's as if they're blaming the people for they're voting with their wallet, and they're upset with how they voted. And if you're upset with how someone voted, perhaps you should change what they're voting for. You should change the dynamic of how they're going to spend that money. And I'm a big believer in market correction in this system of Austrian economics where companies are going to rise and fall on their own and the government ought not to prop them up. And the marketplace is going to vote with their dollar. And if the marketplace is consistently telling you, no, that's something that you need to look at. And I think that is the most healthy way to judge a business, with how the market is responding to what they're doing. And sometimes it's a PR problem too. You might have a great product or something great that people would vote on. You just need to let them know about it. You can have a better strategy of getting those eyeballs in front of your business. And that's what we're going to be talking about on next week's episode. So stay tuned for that, as we're going to be diving into my favorite copywriting campaigns that have been done over the last 70 years and how you can gain more traction for your business through that mechanism. So, yeah, but that's going to wrap up this week's episode. I mentioned at the top of the show, Key Bank. So if you have a small business and you need a banking strategy team on your side, I could not recommend the people of Key Bank enough. They've come alongside us and our company, educated, met with us on site, and have been tremendous partners in our success. And I could not, and it's so weird because like I never thought I'd be having a bank as a sponsor on the podcast. I've always been pretty anti, regional and large banks, and Key just completely blew me out of the water with how they treated not only their consumers as far as their personal banking clients, but also the businesses as well. And they have very detailed programs and strategies built out, whether you're a personal banking customer or a business banking customer. They have a lot of solutions, a lot of offering, and a lot of really good organizational development to help those businesses get better over time and make better moves with money, and telling you what not to do in terms of leveraging debt and telling you what to do in terms of leveraging debt, which is great. So I would highly recommend them. You can check out the show notes for more information on them. You can start their small business check-in tool. They'll help you get in touch with an advisor. So check them out. Highly recommend them. Key.com for more on them. So that's going to wrap up this week's show. I appreciate all of you watching, and I will catch you next week. Take care.